I'd like to be very clear, uh, and I'm going to put my cards very firmly on the table. I don't like J.K. Rowling's books. I think they're derivative of Ursula K. Le Guin, particularly, and I'm a great fan of Ursula K. Le Guin. I remember getting first editions when I was at school, and I've still got those copies, and the hard-backed editions of the Wizard of Earthsea. And uh, J.K. Rowling's books are actually not very good. She's an author badly in need of an editor, and as she got more confident, she was edited less. The books got sprawlingly long, and they are deeply repetitive. And that said, I love The Prisoner of Azkaban, a perfect book. It's been very well edited, sort of a third the size of some of the rubbish that follows, and an excellent movie, but the subsequent books are almost unreadable. The last in the series I never managed to finish, either the book or the film. Pure twaddle. And as for Quidditch, um, just, just a waste of time. But this latest chapter, in what might be called The Cursed Friend, is an increasingly bitter public estrangement between J.K. Rowling and the three leading actors who brought her characters to life and gave her fame: Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint. And this week, Rowling responded on social media to a question about which actors instantly ruin a movie. She replied, "Three guesses, sorry, but that was irresistible." With the subtlety of a howler letter, she appeared to be aiming her wand or her keyboard squarely at Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint. And that is so disappointing, that this woman who has been made a literary icon simply because of the hard work of these three actors, she doesn't deserve it. And they certainly don't deserve this snivelling treatment by a person who simply hasn't been able to write anything else of any value. And that tells you quite a lot, doesn't it? She's a one work wonder, a little bit like Philip Pullman. Philip Pullman, the person who's so much in love with the Oxford comma. What makes this public jab particularly graceless is the context. The actors in question distanced themselves from Rowling following her repeated statements on transgender issues, which many viewed as exclusion, as a form of exclusion, as inflammatory, or to use the acronym du jour, TERF, turfy. And Rowling has insisted that her views are grounded in concern for biological women's rights, but her tone, particularly her refusal to forgive Radcliffe and Watson, sounds increasingly like a literary matriarch slighted by her fictional children. And she's patronising and vulgar, and there's just time. If she's not going to write a decent book, she should shut up. And here's the more pressing question: why do we care so much about Rowling's opinion, or Rowling's opinion? Again, we're now told how to pronounce her name. Once the name is in the public domain, it's up to the public to decide how to pronounce it, like Badenoch. Is it because she created Harry Potter? Or is it because she insists relentlessly on inserting herself into every cultural discourse, from gender theory to character canon to social justice? Her need to control the narrative, both inside and outside the page, is ironically what has unmade her reputation among large swathes of the franchise that she once enchanted. And this leads us to the second half of this rant, and I'm sorry about this, the far less controversial but no less important truth: J.K. Rowling is at best a mid-tier literary talent. Is at best. Now, this is sacrilege to some, but let's be honest. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was charming, certainly. A sort of Enid Blyton with darker robes. Chamber of Secrets, repetitive, and a rehash of what we've just read. Was fine if a little Scooby-Doo. Prisoner of Azkaban, now there's a jewel in the crown. Structurally elegant, narratively taut, emotionally layered, and it's the one book in the series that deserves unqualified praise. But from there, Goblet of Fire bloated. Order of the Phoenix was practically a hostage situation. Half-Blood Prince tried to redeem itself with romantic subplots that read like poorly written fan fiction, and Deathly Hallows, well, as I say, I never made through it. I never made my way through it, and nor the film. I gave up somewhere around the endless camping montage and never looked back. And the truth is that Rowling, like many best-selling authors, desperately needs an editor. Even Iris Murdoch needed an editor towards the end of her life. And Rowling seemed over time to repel the idea of being edited altogether. The prose became baggier, the dialogue more wooden. There are very few people who can write good dialogue, but J.K. Rowling is an example of what dialogue, of how not to write dialogue. When you look at Dickens, every character in a Dickens novel has a different rhythm when they speak, and that's what marks Dickens out as greater, I think, than Tolstoy. Tolstoy is interested in the military uniforms that everybody wears, and that's what distinguishes one character from another. Dickens is interested in the rhythms of their speech, because their speech somehow or other encapsulates, together with their name, encapsulates their identity. And I find that a wonderful thing. It's why Dickens always translates well onto film and onto the stage. I remember Nicholas Nickleby on stage, simply bewitching. But when J.K. Rowling writes, there is no difference in the rhythm of speech between one character and another. You wouldn't know who was speaking unless you said Harry, what's the orange boy's name? I can't remember. Hermione. You wouldn't know which one was which, except perhaps if you followed the plot. You would always know who was speaking in a Dickens novel. Always. And her themes became so moralistic and less magical. What began as a whimsical tale about an orphan wizard ended up as a heavy-handed allegory on fascism, death, and love, themes that require subtlety and depth, not simply an expanding page count. And the films, particularly under the directors like Alfonso and David Yates, which improved on the material significantly. They streamlined the overwrought plots. They gave emotional resonance to characters flattened on the page. They introduced a visual grandeur that Rowling's prose never quite managed. The Prisoner of Azkaban, for example, Alfonso, I can't remember his other name now, is a cinematic triumph. Moody, lyrical, and perfectly balanced between childhood fantasy and adolescent darkness. And meanwhile, Rowling has spent the post-Potter years trying with mixed success to reassert her relevance. Her adult novels under the Robert Galbraith pseudonym are serviceable crime fiction, barely compelling, but far from groundbreaking, and worse still, they carry an increasingly bitter undercurrent, a kind of persecution complex dressed up as plot. And her script of the Cursed Child, the first half is bewitching and delightful. The second half is unwatchable. So where does that leave us? And as for the magical creature stuff, the first film, again, delightful, over which I think she didn't have a final... she hadn't written the script. Second film, unwatchable. She had written the script. And Rowling remains one of the most successful authors of all time, but success doesn't mean value. She's created a global phenomenon. She deserves credit for that. But she's also emblematic of a certain kind of writer who mistook mass popularity for invincibility or worth, who assumed that simply because she could conjure up a world which is derivative. I mean, I much prefer the original by Ursula K. Le Guin, the Earthsea novels. I remember I was given those when I was a child at school. I've still got the hardback first editions that I was given, and I deeply value them. And I remember reading them and struggling over what exactly was an eunuch. What's an eunuch? And my mother told me. But I was terribly confused. But eunuchs. What's an eunuch? Or eunuch. Eunuch, I think was how I pronounced it. It wasn't eunuch. And so, assuming that she could conjure up a world which was derivative, she could also dictate the terms of every conversation surrounding it. She can't. Once you put something out there, it becomes somebody else's. And she doesn't really have a right to it anymore. It's in the territory of her readers and her fans. And her recent comments about the Harry Potter actors are vindictive, cruel, and thoughtless. Thinly veiled mockery disguised as humour. Speak not to strength, but to bitterness. And the trio of Radcliffe, Watson, and Grint are now adults. They have views, they have convictions, they've chosen not to follow their creator's script. And that surely is the point of growing up, in literature and in life. And in the end, Rowling's greatest creation, Harry, was defined not by prophecy or power, but by choice. It would be fitting if this author learned the same lesson.